Hello guys. In this video we're going to talk about a very important non-chord tone, a very important entity, and that is the suspension. And we talk a lot about the suspension because the suspension is probably the most important source of dissonance in the accented part of beats, or in accented parts of meters. So let me start by playing a couple, like a progression real quick for you to hear. This is the one that you're seeing on the screen right now, and this is the progression. It's a good one, right? Or like something very similar to whatever we're used to hearing. This is a 1, there's a 2-6-5 that is preparing the dominant, then we have the dominant, then the voicing changes a little bit, it adds a 7th, that in this case is the A flat, and it resolves. Fa goes to mi, Ti goes to do, everything is following the standard procedures that we're used to. But remember that non-chord tones are embellishments, and we can change the quality of how this music sounds by adding a couple of non-chord tones. And since we're talking about suspensions on this video, well, let's add a couple of suspensions. Check it out. A suspension is nothing else that a note, a tone that is held over, and that is sustained. That is what is suspended. That is what this is called a suspension, after all the rest of the chords have already changed into a next measure. So for example, check it out. Here, all of these notes have changed into the chord member that they are in the next chord, in that 2-6-5. So if I want to add a suspension, what I can do is this. Let me make this a half note, and then I'm gonna hold this G. Suspensions can be tied, but they don't have to, but a lot of times they are. So see, I am going to hold, or this G is gonna hold until over the next measure, where all the rest of the notes have already changed into the next chord, and then it's gonna resolve to the actual note. Let me add another one. I can do the same here, for example. I'm going to hold on into this A flat, and I'm gonna wait until it resolves. So let me play that for you. Hopefully you can see or you can hear how it affects the emotional quality of whatever notes we're playing in the moment. Something important about suspensions is that they always resolve down. There's a different kind of entity that resolves up, but we're going to talk about that later in the semester. For now, if we're talking about the suspension, when we're talking about non-chord tones, we classify them according to how is it that they are approached and left. A suspension is a non-chord tone that is, let me write it down, approached by holding the same note. And then we also said that we can define them, but how is it that they're left? So the suspension is always left by a step down. Already down, step down. So let me just say that again. A suspension is a non-chord tone that is approached by holding the same note from the chord before, and is left, or it resolves by going by a step down. Going down. When we are labeling suspensions, we do this. Well, first we do the same thing that we do. We put a parenthesis and we say this is a suspension. We put a parenthesis and say that this is a suspension. But we also classify them or label them by telling or by writing down the intervals above of the base of that suspension. So for example, this one would be, if you count the quantity of the interval from A flat to G, it's at 7th, and when it resolves down, it it becomes a 6, right? From F to this F. Let me erase this. So we could say that this is a 7/6 suspension. If we do the same with the last one, we see that from E flat to A, that is a 4th. So this is a 4/3 suspension. So that is all we need to do in order to label the suspensions. Now, I took this harmony, I didn't take it randomly. I took this harmony because this is part of an example that we worked on in class, and it is the Beethoven. Check it out. Here we have that 265, but the G is held over from the bar before. So this is that 7/6 suspension that we were talking about. And then on the 1 chord, this is a 5/7 that goes to 1. And in the 1 chord, we have the same that we had on the other example. This is a suspension because it comes from the same note that was held over, and it resolves down by a step into a chord tone. And this would be that 4/3 suspension. I know we already heard this piece a couple of hundred times in class, but let's listen to it one last time to really focus on the sound of those suspensions and that emotional quality that suspensions come with. Another example with a good number of non-chord tones is the Karashima Excerpt that we saw in class. The first one, let's start with the first one. The C sharp that is not part of the G major chord, the one that happens on beat 2, and we can see that it is approached by the same note before, and that is left by a step coming down. It is also accented. It is on beat 1 on that measure. So this is a suspension, and if we want to further label it, since from G to C sharp there is an augmented fourth, and really all we care is the quantity of that, so it is a 4th. We can say that this is a 4/3 suspension, a suspension of a 4th that resolves into a third. There's a couple of others that we haven't studied. We're gonna call this an appoggiatura, and we're gonna call this a retardation, but we're gonna study those later in class. That's why they're in green. And then the passing tone on that G, we already know that one. But check it out. This is that part where there's a lot of non-chord tones happening simultaneously. This E here, it is a suspension. Why? Because even though there is a rest, the note per se is held over from an E that happened in the chord before, and it resolves down to this D. So it resolves down by a step at the end. This is how this excerpt sounds. Okay, so here you have a couple of examples from the most used suspensions, from the ones that we're gonna encounter the most easily in the music that we analyze. We're in the key of B flat major, and those suspensions are gonna be 7/6, 4/3, 9/8, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more about this one because it's a little special, the 2/3 suspension. So here we go. I changed the sound, so now I have strings. So hopefully it'll sound. Hopefully it'll be easier to hear that note that is being held, and the strings sound cool. So here we go. This is the first example. 7/6. This is our second example. That 4/3 suspension. Here we go for the third example. That 9/8 suspension. Remember that 9/8 is the same as 2/1. It's only a compound interval. It's over an octave. And now what I was talking about, sometimes the suspension is in the bass, and in that case the numbers change a little bit. If you think about them, like all of the numbers of the resolutions, So these are smaller than the suspension, right? 9, 8, 4, 3. But in this last case, it is the opposite. The second number, the one that is the resolution, is bigger than the first one. And that is because sometimes the suspension happens on the base, like you can see here. So when it resolves, the interval doesn't shrink, it expands, the opposite. So let me play that one for you. That's gonna be the bass. Hopefully you're able to hear those. Okay, and now the last part of the video, I'm gonna show you how is it that you have to approach when you're part writing exercises. How is it that you have to approach in order to look for a spot that in which a suspension would work. So let me first play this progression. We're in B flat major, so the same key of those examples that I just showed you. And I wrote a progression here. Let me play it for you. Right, a good progression. A little dry as it is right now because we don't have any non-chord tones, but let's add a couple of suspensions. When we want to add a suspension to an exercise like this, or a part writing exercise like this is what we need to do. We need to look for a spot in which any of the top voices, so tenor, alto, or soprano, are moving down by a step into an interval with the bass of a third, a sixth, or an octave, for example. Those are the most common ones. So let's look for spots like this. For example, here's one. Here the tenor is moving down by a step into an interval of an octave with the bass, right? So let's add our suspension here. So instead of this being a half note, I'm gonna hold on to a note. I'll do it in red, why not? Hold on to a note, this is gonna be more suspension. And then I'm gonna resolve that suspension, right? I'm gonna tie it for dramatic purposes. And this is going to be, I'll write it here, a 9/8 suspension. Why? Because G is a ninth above F and it's resolving into an octave. Is there another place where any other of the upper voices is moving down by a step into one of those intervals? Yes, there is. Check this one out. There's an E flat here that is moving into a D, and this D is a third from the bass. This is another spot where I could add a suspension. So let's add it here. We're gonna hold that note, and then we're gonna resolve it into that D. So we mark it as a non-chord tone. We say that it is a suspension, and since it is a fourth again above the bass, this is a 4/3 suspension. So how will this sound now? A lot cooler, probably, or hopefully. So here we go. Okay, and now to finish, let me tell you about some terminology, some extra terminology that we use when we are talking about suspensions. Erase the rest of the voices so we can focus just on those two lines that are the ones that have the suspension. When we have, since the suspension is a note, is a non-chord tone that is approached by holding the same note from before and then resolving, we could say that it is divided into three different stages, stages, and we use names to call those stages. The first one, when we first introduce that note, since suspension needs to be prepared, meaning that the note that is suspended needs to be part of the chord before, we could call this the preparation. It would be step number one. the preparation. Then the second stage would be the actual suspension. And the third step would be the resolution. So this is all you need to do about suspensions for now. Very good song that uses a suspension is Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus. So you're gonna have a little assignment on that, and I'll tell you all about it when I send it to you. Thank you guys, and bye bye. Have a good one.